Good evening and welcome to the Demolition Daily Livestream. I am your host. My name's on the screen. You already know this. Later on in the show, I'll be showing you a video of a drone being used on a demolition site. And trust me, it's worth sticking around for because it's like nothing you've ever seen before in your life, probably. Very quick one. Earlier today, my co-author, good friend, and well, all-round good egg, actually, John Woodward, former president of the IDE, pointed out that today is actually the start of National Children's Book Week. With that in mind, you might like to consider buying a copy of our book that John and I wrote together way back when. It's called My Dad Does Demolition. It's suitable for children in the 4 to 8 year old bracket. It looks a bit like this. Now on to more serious matters. Tonight we're going to be looking at the issue of drink and drug abuse within the demolition and construction sector. And joining me to discuss this will be Matt Taylor of ITS Test Kits. Matt has over 18 years of hands-on experience within the drugs and alcohol policy, training and testing sector. And his company offers a range of simple-to-use drug and alcohol test kits. Let's get him on the stream and let's ask him some questions. Good evening, Matt.
Good evening, Mark. How are you?
I'm very well indeed. Thanks ever so much for joining us and for giving up part of your evening.
You're very welcome. I love the book, by the way. Great plug.
You're more than it's the least I can do, given that you've turned up.
It's on my Christmas list for all the kids.
Now, I recently heard a rumour, an apocryphal tale from the demolition business, that a 12-man demolition team from a company that I shan't name was recently tested for drugs. And according to the industry rumour mill, 11 of them tested positive. How big an issue are drink and drugs in the construction and demolition sector?
The short answer, I would suggest that the construction sector is by far the biggest sector where drugs and alcohol is an issue to the employees. If you have a look at a recent survey conducted by the Considerate Constructors Scheme, it found the majority of UK construction workers are concerned about how drugs and alcohol affect their workplace. Included over 1,200 participants, found that 59% of them have concerns or issues related to drugs and alcohol. 35% of workers have witnessed their colleagues working under the influence of drugs and alcohol. I think there's some very interesting facts out and about. I'm not going to bombard you with stuff, but some really sort of interesting figures are around sort of drink drive figures. And the professions that are most likely to drink drive, and the top 10 are all in the construction sector. So you've got number 1, plumbers; number 2, builders; number 3, ground workers; number 4, labourers; number 5, roofers; number 6, scaffolders; number 7, plasterers; number 8, landscape gardeners; number 9, construction workers general; and number 10, bricklayers. And considering that 28% of people caught in the UK drink driving are on their way to work, that should give you an issue and a sort of idea of where we are with that, Mark.
It's scant consolation. Obviously, this is a demolition podcast or a demolition show predominantly. It's not a great consolation, the fact that demolition didn't actually come up in that list. But you've obviously got some statistics in front of you there. Yeah. And looking specifically at drugs here, are the stats pointing towards recreational drug use, or are we talking about harder drugs, or is it the full gamut of drugs as well?
Okay, well, it's again how you define recreational drugs, Mark. Alcohol is a drug, and it's very harmful. And it has the ability to harm people way more than some of the illegal drugs. But we've also got to include prescription drugs into the mix as well. So when we talk about drugs, we talk about illegal drugs, so things like cocaine, cannabis, heroin, amphetamines, methamphetamines, ecstasy, that type of thing. We've also got legal drugs, so prescription and over-the-counter medication. So that could be opiates, cocodamols, codeines, dihydrocodeines, that type of thing. And also, especially coming into flu seasons, where people are taking night nurses and cold remedies and that type of thing. These all have an effect. We also then have another gamut of drugs which are based around what we would call novel psychoactive substances. They used to be called illegal highs, but things that can still cause impairments while in work. The majority of positives that we see within the construction industry tend to be alcohol, cannabis, cocaine, and ecstasy or amphetamines. That would be the illegal drugs. However, there's a huge amount of opiate use, painkillers, basically, within the construction sector, specifically when you're coming towards the colder months. And it's understandable when people are under pressure to work, they don't work, they don't get paid. They might very easily self-prescribe and, take more opiates than they should be doing. So
it's interesting you should say that. I'm just going to cut in very, very quickly.
Yeah, no worries.
We've just had a comment here from Shane Pace. Hi, Shane. Thanks for tuning in. Are addictive painkillers an issue like America? By the sound of it, yes, they very much are.
Yeah, we're not in the same league yet as America. In America, we call it Pharmageddon, which is essentially a huge opiate addiction. But when people can get hold of prescription medications very, very easily through the black market, you can go on the internet and be prescribed these things or buy them off friends or buy them on the black market. Yes, they are a problem. Coming back to where we were talking about the dangers, statistically, a construction worker is 6 times more likely to be killed at work than somebody else in the industry. So when you mix the risks involved in working within that industry together with something that can cause impairment, being under the influence, whether that be drink, drugs, or tiredness, or stress, or whatever it might be, it's only going to expand and impact further, the dangers involved. But when we're looking at prescription opiates, it tends to be, in America, they've got very much an opiate sort of addiction problem as a middle class problem. In the construction sector, we tend to see people using it as a painkiller for what it's required for, but self-prescribing and using more than their prescribed dose. So quite often it's an education thing to sort of say, look, you do realize that prescription medication can cause you impairment. So if you look at being stopped by a police officer on the roadside, there is no difference between something that's illegal or legal. If it's impairing your ability to drive, you can be arrested and charged for that. And it's exactly the same in the workplace. And a prescription medication, a glass of alcohol, which is legal, has the same effect, or if sometimes worse than perhaps, a toke of a spliff or something.
We've had a few more questions in here, and I'll go to one from our friend Peter Haddock first off. How do you actually test for all these different drugs? We will come on to exactly how your test kits work a bit later on, but I think that's a valid question at this point. How do you test?
Okay, so there's 2 things you need to understand and realize about drug testing. So firstly, drug testing can't give you all the answers. Just because you pass a drug test doesn't mean you're not using drugs. It could just mean you're not using the drugs that are being tested for on that specific drug test. You've also got to realize that drug testing comes in 2 parts. So there's a screening element, which is the cost-effective, cheap element. And that's really casting out a wide net and seeing if something may or may not be present. And that has a high degree of accuracy. But it's not 100% accurate. If you then find something in that sample. So that could be, I don't know, traces of cannabis, for instance. At that point, we wouldn't call it a positive. We would call it a non-negative or a presumed positive. And that's for the reason that bit there is not legally defensible on its own. So you wouldn't want to be taking disciplinary action based on a screen result, whether it be a laboratory screen or a point of care screen, and we'll come to what those mean a bit later on. So once you've had a non-negative result, that then needs to be confirmed via laboratory analysis at a UCAS accredited laboratory. So within Europe, we would follow the EWDTS guidelines. So those guidelines specify the cutoff levels that we should be using for screening, and also the cutoff levels we should be using for confirmation. Once we get a result back from the lab, that will then give us a legally defensible result, and that might be positive due to medication declared, positive due to medication not declared, positive due to presence of an illegal drug or metabolite in the system, or it could be a number of other reasons. It could be obviously come back as negative as well. So the way we test for the drugs, the majority of testing within the world is done via either urine or oral fluid. But there are other types of testing using sweat or wipes. Fingerprint testing is out there at the moment currently, which works a little bit off sort of sweat from the fingers, a little bit more complicated than that. And you also have the wipes, which can wipe the skin or wipe the tongue, specifically used by police forces around the world. Hair testing is also there, but that tends not to be so much for employment. In this country, that tends to be more for child protection, legal medical cases where you're looking for forensics and a much longer window of detection. So I come to that point now, window of detection. You're asking how you normally test. And if you just look at urine and oral fluid predominantly, urine has a longer window of detection for drugs or their metabolites, and that would tend to be between 3 and 5 days post-consumption. There is a difference with cannabis within urine because cannabis is fat soluble and metabolite. If you're a heavy smoker of cannabis and you have done for a long time, something that I was many years ago, and you suddenly stop, it can remain in your urine system, detectable in the urine system for up to 4 to 5 weeks. It very much depends on your metabolism and your fat storage and a number of other things. When we look at oral fluid, and we call it oral fluid rather than saliva, some people call it saliva testing, but there are other fluids within the mouth that get picked up. But if we look at oral fluid testing, realistically, that's sort of 12 to 18 hours post-consumption, up to 24 hours with some drugs, but much less with others. So again, it's what are you looking for? How are you looking for it? What are you trying to look for? And, what are you trying to prove or disprove? And that's why it's very important for you to talk to somebody and realize what you're testing for, why you're testing for it, and what it actually shows you, but also what it doesn't show you as well, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that always sticks out for me is, if somebody's had a drink, you can generally smell it, or they might be a bit staggery, a bit slurred of speech and that kind of thing. A lot of drugs, you don't get any real telltale signs, do you? Are there any signs that employers and fellow employees should be looking out for?
Yes, there's plenty. It's something we cover in one of our very popular training courses, where we look at spotting the signs and symptoms. But just coming back to what you were saying there, Mark, and this is something I cover in the training. Most people would be able to tell somebody who's under the influence of alcohol, because most people have been drunk themselves. So you can pull on personal experiences. You can say, well, I know they would smell of alcohol. I know they would be slurring words. But somebody slurring speech, having problems with motor skills, could indicate an underlying health issue. The other thing that you need to also consider is most people might be able to pick up somebody who's come into work drunk, or morning after, somebody that's drunk at work, that type of thing, but it'd be very difficult for them to pick up somebody with an alcohol dependency or addiction. So somebody that's an alcoholic is very, very practiced at being able to hide and disguise the signs and symptoms, whether that be chewing gum, whether that be eating mints. They would walk and talk and function very, very normally, in inverted commas. And because that person acts like that every day, it's difficult for a co-worker who's alongside them 8, 9, 10 hours a day sometimes and hasn't seen that gradual progression. But it's often sometimes easier for somebody from the outside coming in and seeing the dramatic changes between maybe seeing that person 3, 4, 5 months ago and now seeing them. When it comes on to drugs, each type of drug, whether it be a stimulant or it be a sedative, etc., will cause different types of signs and symptoms. And quite often you can do it by looking at the eyes, whether the pupils dilate or constrict, whether people have red eyes, etc. But then there's also a number of other things as well. And it is a skill. And one of the things we always encourage people is, if you're wanting your managers, supervisors, employees to keep an eye out and to be able to spot some of these signs and symptoms, it's really important to train them how to do it, give them the information. You wouldn't, for instance, if I put it akin to something within your industry, you wouldn't throw me a detonator and some explosives and say, can you go and blow that up? I could probably do it, but I'd probably get it wrong. So it's really, really important to give people the knowledge to be able to take legally defensible, but also responsible action. So what do I do? When do I get a second opinion? What are the tools available to me if I do suspect? How do I do this? And how do I do it in a way that supports both the employee and the employer?
We'll come on to that in a second, because that is a very interesting point. But we've had another question here from Peter Haddock, which says, how can we change this drink driving issue? I guess it's always been going to the pub after work, which I'm sure that, I've certainly done it in the past, although I don't work on construction sites, but I've certainly done that in the past. Is that, have you seen an upswing or a downswing as a result of COVID? And also, drugs, certainly, I'm 55 now, so maybe I'm a bit too old for that sort of thing, but as far as I was concerned, drugs they existed, but they didn't come into my field of vision. All the time I was a lager fiend, but that was about as serious as my issues got. Where has the drug problem come from?
Okay, so let's tackle that question in a couple of bites. So firstly, COVID has absolutely impacted the drinking habits and patterns and volumes around the globe, not just in the UK. Mental health is a huge impact, specifically within the construction sector. And it's one of the things that drives the use of drink and drugs. I would suggest the two things that really are the driving factors within consumption within the construction industry would be mental health and also pain. Those two things, people are using drink or drugs as a crutch to try and support them. COVID itself has caused more stress, more issues, people worried about their jobs. And when people worry about their jobs and stress and perhaps start suffering more from mental health, it does have an impact and they will consume more. So yes, drink and drugs consumption has increased dramatically during the COVID, during this last year really, and specifically during lockdown. People are drinking earlier in the day. People that are working from home or furlough, they're getting into habits and then having to go back to work. So they may go back into work with a problem that they didn't have pre-COVID. And that might be, well, I'm working from home, so I'll smoke a few spliffs during the day and just chill out and relax, and nobody's going to know. Or it could be, I'll have a glass of lager, or a glass of wine, or whatever it might be. Coming back to what you were saying about drugs, you know, I was a large consumer of drugs within the sort of 90s. And one of the things I would say is drug use is far more prolific than people possibly give it credit for. There are certainly two sort of age groups, and I would say there's the alcohol consumption age group, but very much behind it is an alcohol and drug consumption, and behind that is just drug consumption. So there's an age group of around about sort of 30 to 40-year-olds who have been within the drug and the alcohol use sector. Cocaine use is massive. It's often just taken for granted. You know, passing the spliff around is often referred to as soft drugs, whereas cocaine might be referred to as hard drugs. But again, they're quite often just socially acceptable, and it's a bit of a norm. When you look at a line of cocaine now being as cheaper than a cup of coffee or an espresso, you know, and it's used in very much a similar way, that's the sort of sector that we're in. You know, I would suggest people in the workplace are using cocaine and stimulants either to keep them awake during long work hours, or just to realistically sometimes just relieve boredom. I don't know if within your industry, Mark, do a lot of people work away in gangs and perhaps stay in a temporary accommodation during the week?
You've just hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's been one of the issues that we've certainly addressed it in the past in relation to drink and drugs, but more so with mental health is the fact that, you know, a lot of the guys, you know, if you're in a demolition gang, you can be working literally anywhere. And, you know, some of these jobs go on for weeks, months, sometimes years. And now, okay, you might get home at the weekend, but you know, you don't have any access to your GP. You're away from your family and your friends and your support network, and there is that boredom. You know, if you've just done a 10-hour day on site, and that day is over,
can I ask,
what do you do?
Is it predominantly male industry dominated?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing more and more women on sites these days, but no, it's not. You know, there is a real imbalance. I mean, demolition, off the top of my head, I'd say it was probably 85% male, if not slightly more than that.
And you've put your time in, haven't you, Mark?
I have, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, if you think about working on site and you have an issue at home, a mental health issue, do you think many of the lads would be sharing that with the people that they're bunking up with, or do you think they would find solace in a bottle, or perhaps, you know, in a drug?
Certainly the experience, as I say, talking about things like mental health awareness, 99.9% of men in the industry seem to keep things bottled up, and yeah, you know, like you say, seek solace in something other than talking to their friends.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, are there a lot of young people coming through in demolition, or what's the sort of age group of you know, the average sort of age group?
I always refer to construction and demolition as a bit like a funnel. So you've always got people retiring or, you know, moving on to other things at the bottom. So you're constantly topping up, and by and large, that topping up is done with school and college and university leavers. By and large, you know, particularly when you're talking about labour level, you are talking about school leavers. So yeah, it tends to be young people in at the top and older people out at the bottom.
And I think the older people coming out at the bottom are more used to and probably more affected by alcohol usage, but certainly the youth and the sort of people who maybe will have worked on the coalface before, but now moving into management, would very much have a high experience of drugs, either themselves or people around them that they know, family, friends. You know, it's very much commonplace now. It's not something that's, you know, kept in a cupboard that nobody knows about. It's very much socially acceptable within many, many different circles.
It's funny you should mention that term there. Peter's back again. Cocaine socially acceptable is crazy, and a line cheaper than a coffee. I mean, that does seem, even allowing for Starbucks pricing these days, that does seem lunacy, doesn't it? It really does.
It is, but unfortunately, that's the way it is. You know, during the 90s, if you look at, you know, a gram of cocaine probably cost you in the region of 80 to 100 quid. You could probably pick that up. Okay, it's not going to be as high a strength or possibly even a complete gram, but, you know, you can pick those up for 30, 35 pounds a gram. If you look at an ecstasy tablet, 30 pounds, you know, in the early 90s, now a couple of quid. So it's actually cheaper than alcohol as well. And that's the other thing you've got to consider is, you know, sometimes it's less easy to detect. You know, if you're having a drink, you can smell it on your breath. Coming back to something you said before, Mark, you know, if your managers and supervisors are not competent and confident in the ability to spot the signs and symptoms, they're just going to let it go past. They're not going to know. And, you know, the people that are using drinking drugs know that. So they know what to say. They know how to behave so that they don't get caught.
Seems crazy to me. Now, one of the things that you've already touched on, and I've looked at this in the past, assuming that an employee does test positive for, and let's be specific about drugs in this instance, it's not just as straightforward as they've tested positive, therefore it's a dismissal, is it? It's you know, it's a lot more complicated than that. I mean, my understanding is it's got to be written into their terms of employment and that kind of thing. And you know, I try to see both sides of the argument on these things, but with something like demolition or construction, particularly where you're talking about possibly operating heavy equipment and that kind of thing, it just seems crazy that you know, somebody that's put themselves and others at risk, it's not just as straightforward as an instant dismissal.
No, there's so many different factors you've got to consider, and you know, first and foremost, a drug and alcohol policy is all about health and safety. That's the first thing. So health, the health and well-being of your employees and the people that they come into contact, and the safety of those other stakeholders as well. Unfortunately, the amount of policies that I see which are just completely unfit for purpose, maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs on the side of A4 that says you can't take drugs, and if you do, we'll dismiss you. They just don't hold water. You know, policies have to be reasonably detailed and reasonably complex so that they can cover all aspects. You need to be able to protect the employer. An employer has duty of care, has obligations to health and safety law and to criminal law as well, and to things like, you know, misuse of drugs acts, transport works act, all those different elements. But also the employees have a duty of care as well. So you need to set out what's expected. You need to set out what will happen if, but you also need to put in a policy like that the ability for somebody to come forward and say, I've got a problem, can you help? So there's so many different scenarios of why somebody would show positive. If I was an employee and I come forward of my own free will, by the way, not when I've been selected for random testing, and at that point I say, excuse me, but I just need to let you know at this point. But if I come forward of my own free will and come to a manager and say, or come to a friend, a colleague and say, look, you know, I'm really struggling at home. My wife's left me and I've got financial issues and I've started using drugs and I don't want to lose my job as well. Can you help? Then that is a prime opportunity for the employer to extend a hand of help and give that person the ability to be able to go and seek that help in a manner which allows their employment to stay open. If I ask for help, I shouldn't be dismissed. Okay, I've done nothing wrong. I've come forward just like I would maybe come forward and say, you know, I'm suffering from mental health, or I'm suffering from a bad back or stress or whatever it might be. I've come forward and I've asked for help. So the company should be there to help me. That doesn't mean financially they have to help me. It could be signposting me to occupational health, signposting me to groups local to me where I can go and get the help and support and counselling maybe that I need. I may have developed an addiction. I may have developed a dependency, two different things. I might be just using socially, and I could say, well, I can stop whenever I want. So you have to be able to deal with that. If I have an accident on site, and in the policy it says you do with cause testing, for cause testing. So after an accident, incident, near miss, or where somebody has suspicion or reason to believe that I may be under the influence of drink or drugs, and I test positive. So I've been tested either via urine, so it could be a urine test like that. So pee into the pot, and it gives each one of these strips here is a different drug, and that would then indicate that's a screen result. And you've got the same with an oral fluid kit here as well, where this one tests for 6 different drugs. And that screen is a non-negative. It then goes to the laboratory and it comes back and says, yes, we found cocaine in the system over and above the prescribed limit, the cutoff limit. You then need to have that stated somewhere in the policy that says, if somebody returns a positive result, what's going to happen? Are they going to face disciplinary action? Disciplinary action doesn't mean they have to be sacked, but it needs to state in that policy exactly what will happen. If there are no rules and regulations, then actually what you're saying is go and do what you want, and there's no consequences for your behavior. There could be things that are in the policy to give guidance about how long alcohol might stay in your system for. You need to look at different levels. So for instance, in Scotland, the drink drive level is lower than in England. And if you have a company, an English company with a policy that gives the English limit, who's now working in Scotland, they need to be aware of it. So you have to think of all these different aspects. The policy there is to give people knowledge of what can happen. So it should cover every possible eventuality. When do I get tested? Am I pre-employment tested? Am I random tested? If I am random tested, how are people selected? What will happen if I want help? Where do I get it? What will happen if I ask? Is it confidential? What happens if I, get pulled over by the police and lose my license through drink driving? Do I have to declare that? What if I'm in a company van? Am I insured if I'm covered, if I'm driving while under the influence? All these different aspects need to be in there. So you'd have a policy, but you'd also have a procedures document. The procedures document really is there for the stakeholders to be able to take responsible and consistent action. So everybody's singing off the same hymn sheet. So you don't get one manager who goes, well, it was just cannabis. I've known the lad for 20 years. Let's treat him differently from the lad we sacked last week for doing the same thing. So consistency, legal defensibility, all these things are there, but they're only there if you define them in a policy and procedures document. If any of your listeners or readers are interested, I have published a document about writing drugs and alcohol policies, and it's a 40-odd page booklet, and in there's a little checklist which you can go through and see if your policy sort of meets the guidelines, and I'm more than happy to share that free of charge. If somebody wants to contact me, I'm more than happy to do that.
That would be fantastic. I mean, if you can let me have the link to that, then I can share that.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll email it across to you sometime tomorrow, and you can then distribute it. It's not a selling tool. It's there to try and create awareness of why a 10-line policy document isn't adequate specifically for the industries that we're working in.
Well, it looks like we've got one taker for that, which is Shane Pace, and Shane actually works in the insurance, demolition insurance business. So, he would certainly be aware of the needs and the systems that they have to go through to safeguard insurance policies.
Well, Mark, Mark, one of the interesting things to maybe ask Shane would be, if a company came to him and they had things like a robust drugs and alcohol policy in place, does that affect their insurance premiums? Does it give them positive? Does it paint them in a positive light with insurance companies?
Yeah, I'd be interested to see. It looks like he's still here, so I'll see if I can get an answer out of him. And I think Peter wants a copy of your book as well, so we'll certainly get that sorted. I guess the obvious question here is, where does your company slot into all of this? What is it that your company actually does?
Okay, so I've been working within the industry for practically 18, 19 years. I sit on some world-leading forums as well, and help organize some of those forums across the globe. There are many companies that offer drugs and alcohol testing, services, policy, and everything else. That can be sending people out to do the testing. It can be just selling kits. It could be providing laboratory services. It could be the whole gamut. We're finding a lot of occupational health companies have bolted on drugs and alcohol testing as another service, because they're there doing maybe lung function tests or a sort of fitness for work tests. And they say, well, while we're here, we can do a drug and alcohol test. So where does my company fit in? Well, we very much started our business based around quality, innovation, and trust. We know we're not always the cheapest, because we very much pitch our quality at a high level. Some of the stuff we see out there, stuff given away, policies, given away free of charge. Something my mom and dad always said to me, something that's free always comes with a caveat. So, copy and pasting stuff off the internet, borrowing your friend's policy from a similar company, always look through it and make sure that it's fit for purpose and bespoke to the purpose that you require it to be. Our company provides policy, training, help, support, education. We also sell drug testing equipment, and whether that be breathalyzers. So we focus very much on Home Office approved breathalyzers, and what we would call equipment which meets the European workplace drug testing guidelines. There are other companies out there similar. There are other companies out there, that do more, and some that do less. I would suggest, if you're wanting to find out more information, you're either looking to revamp your policy, write a policy, introduce a policy, come and speak to a company like ourselves or somebody else and get some expert help. A telephone call doesn't cost anything, but when you start looking and wanting the experience and expertise of somebody that has that knowledge, that will cost you something. So, if I was to offer a free policy, the only reason I'm going to offer a free policy is if I'm going to, recoup the money some other way, because every policy should be different. Kits should be fit for purpose. They should be high quality with a high sensitivity, specificity, and accuracy. Are they using the correct cutoff guidelines? So, for instance, there's a lot of drug testing kits which are manufactured for the mass market, tends to be the USA mass market, and they tend to use higher cutoff levels than perhaps you would expect to use in Europe. So the drug testing kits that we use tend to have those lower cutoff levels, more akin to the European Workplace Drug Testing Society guidelines. As I say, we're not for everybody. We very much focus on quality and service, and providing our customers with something which gives them trust and fit for purpose. It's difficult for me to say, Mark, really. I mean, there's plenty of companies out there that do what we do. We believe we do it very well. And if you're interested in finding out more, give us a ring. It's not going to cost you anything.
No, absolutely. Now, thankfully, Shane was paying attention. Well done, Shane. And you can tell he's probably typed this in a bit of a hurry, but thanks for getting back to us. Be a massive plus requirement if, say, the company had drugs-related issues claims. Probably more relevant to haulage drivers due to the nature of works. It's not a subject I know about enough. I mean, certainly, if you're actually driving, there's an awful lot of people on demolition sites that aren't driving or operating machinery. So I think that's a fair point. One of the points that Peter Haddock has made here as well, and it echoes back to what we were saying about discussing mental health issues and personal problems and that kind of thing. Men don't particularly like to share. I think there's also a degree of we don't like to get people in trouble as well. So his question is, do you think people are reluctant to out a colleague? My guess is going to be, yes, they probably are.
Again, coming back to what we were saying, there's training and there's education, two completely different things. So what we should be doing is training the managers and supervisors how to spot the signs and symptoms, what to do, how to do it in a responsible and legally defensible manner, how to follow the policy, word by word, to ensure its consistent approach is led. Education should be for the masses. It should be for all employees. And part of that education should be education, not propaganda. Standing up in front, so having a health and safety manager standing up in front of a team of lads and saying, thou should not take drugs, do not take drugs, just say no, it doesn't work. The simple fact is there's people out there that will be taking drugs, and they'll know far more than the health and safety manager stood in front of them. So it just sort of goes over the top, falls on deaf ears. I've heard it so many times before. I'm not going to bother listening. Nobody's ever caught me before. I know how to pass a test. I've just used Jimmy's urine rather than mine. All these different aspects of how they've got past before, because the company that employs them doesn't really know what they're doing and has sort of taken a bit off the internet from here, read a little bit about there and sort of gone, okay, well, we can do this, and they're not actually doing it properly. Educating the workforce should be inclusive of things like, okay, if I'm caught, what are the implications? So firstly, the implication should be, well, actually, if you're consuming drugs or alcohol, you'll come to work under the influence of drugs and alcohol. And don't forget, under the influence can also mean being hungover, because that has a massive after effect on people's performance and work. What does it mean? Well, it means I could kill myself. I could kill somebody else. So actually, one of the least impact things is I might lose my job. If I'm working with a gang of lads and I know one of them may be using drugs, I think, was it Peter that asked that question, Mark?
It was, yeah.
Okay. So Peter used the term outing. And that's the issue. It's educating people that actually it's not grassing people up. What you're actually doing is supporting your work colleagues. So by encouraging them to go forward and ask for help, they're not going to get sacked. Sitting down with them and saying, look, I've noticed you're smelling of alcohol, Matt. Is there any issues? I think we need to just go and tell somebody you've got a problem. Or why have you come into work like that? And by surrendering yourself voluntarily, then disciplinary shouldn't come into it. Certainly losing your job shouldn't come into it. The problem being is, if you turn a blind eye and you don't out somebody, what's the worst that can happen? Okay, so the worst that could happen is that person doesn't go home tonight. And you didn't say anything. So who's responsible?
Yeah, that really does focus the mind, doesn't it? It really does. Obviously, you and I are speaking mid-lockdown. I've just been watching Boris Johnson giving an update, so we are very much mid-lockdown. And your company is now looking at an instant rapid test for COVID-19, as well as the drink and drugs testing as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. You know, we don't just do drink and drugs and alcohol testing. We do health and wellbeing testing. So when COVID came along and we were asked by a lot of clients, can we do the testing? It was a natural progression. So we invested an awful lot of time and money into training ourselves and educating ourselves around virology and the way COVID-19 can be detected, both accurately and inaccurately. We've been working within the COVID testing now since probably about February. And we've just literally this last week are introducing to our clients an instant COVID test. So it's what we call a lateral flow test. So it's very similar to a drug test, and it gives a result, a highly accurate result, about 99% accuracy, 100% sensitivity, 97 point something specificity. Again, if people want the information, by all means, come through yourself, Mark, or come to me directly. It's not a problem. But these tests are a cost-effective way of screening the workforce. Are they as accurate as a laboratory test? And the answer is no. Okay. But then a laboratory test would cost you 100, 120 pounds a time, which is not cost effective when you're having to screen lots of people lots of times. So having a very cost effective but highly accurate and instant result, which you can then act upon, I think, and I truly believe, is a game changer. And one of the things that our company decided when COVID came in was, if we're going to go into COVID testing, we don't want to play at it. So there was a number of elements. A, can we do it properly, and can we do it well? Because that's what we're renowned for. We don't want to let customers down. We don't want to let potential customers down either. But also the other thing we decided very much so was that we weren't going to price gouge. We were not going to be one of these companies that made reams and reams of profit out of pandemic. There's nothing more we'd like to see than getting people back to work, because actually that's where our business is. If people aren't in work, then drug and alcohol testing is pretty irrelevant. If people aren't on site and they're all sat at home, drugs and alcohol is irrelevant. So it's really important to us to play our part. And we decided that, yes, okay, we're not a charity. We have to cover costs and we have to make a certain amount of profit, but we're certainly not a company that's going to price gouge. We know companies that are charging 4, 5, 6 times even more for these kits because they're novel, because they're new, because we know people are going to want them. And the demand has been fantastic. To be honest with you, it really is good. I must caveat it with they're for professional use only, so we can't just sell it to anybody. But we have a massive amount of our customers who have occupational health support, and with the occupational health support, they're able to provide the screening in a cost-effective and rapid way. What's better than being able to screen some people who are on site, on a Monday morning and give everybody a clean bill of health for that day. It gives both the employer and the employees comfort. It helps them with the safety. Some people may or may not want to know. We also do it in conjunction with an antibody test as well, but that's by the by. So we are heavily involved in COVID testing. We also provide a number of testing locations for one of our large customers, where we do fit to fly testing, which is a full back to lab service, and provide the sampling for them as well. That's dotted around the UK.
It's interesting you should mention the lateral flow test, because I was literally just watching an army brigadier talking about the fact that's what they're using as a test run up in Liverpool at the moment. So if you'd have said that to me an hour ago, I wouldn't have known what you were talking about. But having just seen one, I know exactly what it looks like.
Yeah, it's very similar to a drug test. It's just it works in a slightly different way. On a drug test, you're looking for lines not to be there, whereas with a COVID test, specifically the technology that we use, which is the lateral flow, you'll be looking for a line to say it is there. All these kits, again, there's plenty of kits on the market which are cheap and cheerful. There's plenty of crap on the market. Unfortunately, it is being seen as a cash cow by many. This return to work, can we get everybody back to work if we just give them all these tests and, let's just pump out all these cheap and cheerful things, sell them at an extortionate price. And there's only going to be one winner to that, and it's not going to be the UK companies and businesses. The ones up in Liverpool, they're using a number of different tests. The tests we actually selected to distribute and sell meets the target profile set by the MHRA, which is the health side of the government. But it also was then put through the government procurement exercise as well. So I believe that they've procured quite a few of these in the millions. So we know ours is at a very high standard. Like I say, we're not pressurizing anybody to use ourselves, but it's like anything. Do your due diligence, do your homework, know what you're asking for, know what you're getting, and go into it with your eyes open rather than just jumping in with both feet, which is unfortunately what the government have done previously, specifically with things like PPE, etc.
Absolutely. Now, at this point, Matt, I normally say to people, where can people find out more? But you've set a trend. I think you've actually put your web address in your caption there. So it's www.itstestkits.com. I will put that in the description. But I'm very conscious of the fact that I've already kept you for 52 minutes on a Monday evening. I'm sure you've got better places to be. So I'm going to let you get back to your evening. I was going to say your day job, but your day job should be over and done with for now.
Yeah.
But Matt, I really appreciate you being here this evening. I think that was absolutely fascinating, and I hope it's led a few people in the right direction. And I hope to speak to you again very, very soon.
Great, and thank you very much for having me on, Mark. As I say, anybody wants any information, they can either come directly through you, or my email is matt@itstestkits.com. So matt@itstestkits.com. Or you can follow me on LinkedIn, that type of thing as well.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. Thanks ever so much, Matt. And I shall speak to you again.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye. I hope you thoroughly enjoyed that. Now, one of the things that was going on behind the scenes, I couldn't find time to squeeze it in. There was a conversation going on in the background between our friend Shane Pace and Peter Haddock about a documentary in the US about a heavy construction town where doctors dished out free painkillers, and then the funding was pulled and opiates filled the void. Now the town is devastated. That conversation was going on, and Shane has come back and said apparently that TV show is called Heroin Town Dark States, and it's a Louis Theroux production. So once I get off the show this evening, I'm going to go and have a look, see if I can find that as well. If you joined late, if you didn't get all of this, if you'd like to listen again because you enjoyed it, or I can't imagine why you'd want to listen again if you didn't enjoy it. But we are going to take the audio from this and turn this into a podcast in the very, very near future, like the next 24, 48 hours. We've seen a real boom in demand for our podcasts over the last month or so. We came back in October, and we really have seen demand for those podcasts going through the roof. But we do get a lot of questions about how to listen. Now, you can listen via a smart speaker. Just say, Alexa, and ask to listen to Demolition News Radio. And again, I'm having to whisper because I've got a smart speaker by my screen here. But it's just as easy to find it on your smartphone. And to give you an idea of just how you do that, here you go. Demolition News Radio. I'm your host, Mark Anthony. Okay, that's podcast done. Now, if you were here at the top of the show, you might recall that I promised you a drone video like nothing you've ever seen before. As you've waited so patiently for 55 minutes and 18 seconds, I shall dally no longer. If you're listening with headphones, and I would recommend it, brace yourself, because the video I'm about to play you has bass for days. Enjoy this. Told you it was good, didn't I? It's an interesting video and a great talking point. I think it's a great party piece, but I can't currently, with current drone technology, see that allowing us to take a drone up to a proper high reach, so 30, 40, 50 meters in the air. I can't imagine that there is a drone currently commercially available at a sensible cost that could actually take a hose filled with water to that sort of height. Having said that, who knows? They are the Christmas gift of choice. So drones are very much in their infancy, I think. Maybe drones of the future might be powerful enough to make this idea a high-reach reality. We may see. That just about brings this show to a close. I'll be back here again, same time, same place tomorrow. But, and it is a big but, when I started these to coincide with the latest lockdown last week, I promised that I'd be here every single day during the duration of the current lockdown. It turns out I can't. I've been temporarily seconded, I'm afraid. On Wednesday evening next week, there will be no Demolition Daily livestream. Instead, I will be over on our channel, Diggers and Dozers, with my co-presenter, Peter Haddock, discussing the respective merits of the latest backhoe loaders from Caterpillar and JCB. We've been talking about it today. It promises to be a really good fun show. So if diggers are your thing, I hope you can find the time to pop over to Diggers and Dozers to join both myself and Peter over there. But till tomorrow, stay safe, look after yourselves, your family, your friends, and your colleagues. Steer clear of the drink and the drugs, because there are people that can actually find the fact that you haven't been very careful. Look after yourselves, and thanks again to Matt, to Peter, to Shane, to Steve, to Tony, and to everybody else that was in the stream that I can't actually see now. And I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks ever so much for joining.